Right, so Trump has won, and won an election that really was Kamala Harris's to lose, we all thought. The Democrats, having already realised that Joe Biden was not the right horse to back any longer, did at least realise they needed another face. But in true liberal fashion figured that would be enough, because they cannot possibly have got any of their policies wrong. They can't be wrong in any way. Cannot possibly have misstepped or misspoken, kept the really bad stuff on the down low, and Trump was bound to destroy himself, and they'd be quids in. Well, clearly not. Where leadership was required, there was none on display. Harris came across as aloof, refused to answer questions on the matter of Gaza or a ceasefire, couldn't bring herself to say that Israel was committing genocide at all, because I guess some bars are just too high to get over, and telling people that she's speaking when she wants their vote was not the way to do it, really. But to sum up how much the Liberal game plan sucked, they literally lost to a guy telling the American public that immigrants are eating their dogs, a guy who lied repeatedly for attention, a guy who is a convicted felon, for heaven's sake. And the worst part of all is that they simply will not learn from this. They will just double down. The party who handed the presidency to Trump was also the party that decided it would rather lose and be complicit in genocide than work to actually stop it. And that cost them most of all. Right, so Donald Trump has won the US presidency again. Far be it from me to not point out the obvious problems with that. The US literally had 4 years of this guy to learn from, after all, to not go there again, not to mention an election campaign full of reasons to turn away from this worst example of humanity that there is pretty much going. Apparently the appropriate word to use to describe this situation is recrudescence, which means the return of something terrible after a period of reprieve. Trump is a convicted felon. A criminal is now the leader of the free world. A guy who was an economic failure and whose plans for the economy this time were the worst on offer of any party and any politician. A guy who comes out with the most ridiculous nonsense that should get him laughed out of a rally or an election debate studio, from cats and dogs getting eaten by migrants in Ohio to saying windmills cause cancer. Ignored the COVID pandemic, eliciting one of the worst responses on the planet to it, and that's coming from Britain. Refusing to believe it was real, and God help you if another one comes along in his time in office, this time when he's going to put a medical conspiracy theorist like Robert Kennedy in charge of health. A racist, misogynistic, homophobe, and a literal fascist, right up to the point he was quoting Hitler. Now, there are plenty of videos going around right now offering analysis of how Trump won and the ramifications of that, why Kamala Harris and the Democrats lost. There are a lot of very upset people in America unable to countenance how that happened, however. But there's really only one lesson to learn from this, and that is, if you back liberals, if you subscribe to centrist, never enough politics, it changed nothing at the fundamental level that ordinary working class Americans, if I might put it that way, but it goes the same for every country, destroying the hope that more socialist agendas have to offer, it only leads in one direction. Ever rightwards as people become more and more disenfranchised with their lot in life, never improving. But this time something else really thrusts that disparity into the limelight. The politics of appeasement is what Joe Biden represented. And for as much as some may point to some of the good domestic policy he had, the economy doing well despite issues with inflation, it wasn't what made the headlines. It wasn't what Joe Biden is going to be remembered for, because he will be remembered for being Genocide Joe and paying the bills for Israel to commit genocide on the level we have seen for the last more than a year now. And in no small part was that why the Democrats lost most of all. If Americans cannot work out how this happened, then they aren't paying attention to the communities they live amongst in their multicultural societies who are viscerally appalled at Biden and Harris over Israel and Gaza. Where Democrats themselves may have figured that Trump was too divisive, that some Republicans after his last stint in the White House would never possibly back him again and would therefore inevitably come to them, they felt they could therefore get away with spurning the Muslim vote most especially, that they were clearly losing over that matter of Israel and Gaza. As it turned out, the Republican vote barely shifted. Conservatives will always vote in their own self-interest, and that was very much reflected. What the Democrats experienced was losing some of that Muslim base they typically see vote for them to Trump as well. And in some areas, a massive boost for Jill Stein's Green Party was the result as well. It was the difference between winning and losing, and all because Harris was completely vapid, did not come across with any sense of integrity because she pretty much just swore to stick to everything Biden was doing before her, had no plan of her own, not least on that matter of Israel and Gaza, which was a subject she dodged repeatedly. The worst thing she could have done, yet clearly this was the advice she was given to do by her fellow Liberals on her team. I wonder how much of that advice came from British Labour Party figures who went over to the US to advise her. I know one such figure was this guy, Jonathan Ashworth. He couldn't help but brag on social media that he was off to advise the Harris campaign a while back, which elicited snorts of derision from this side of the pond. Because this is a guy who, despite Labour's landslide victory in our UK general election back in July, lost his seat as a Labour MP, losing over 35% of his own vote share from before to a local optician. And the issue was Gaza and Israel, and Kier Starmer's devotion to Israel in a seat with a massive Muslim population. There's a theme here. This was a guy who lost his own seat over the issue of Gaza and support for Israel, and he went over to Harris, and did he basically tell her to do exactly the same as he does? Because the result was very much the same, wasn't it? And this is the thing with Liberals. They don't learn. And neither does the media that support them. And so we shouldn't be surprised when another option is there saying all the things we might be thinking and getting more attention for doing so, because you can always guarantee a right-wing candidate and a right-wing supported media, of which there is always plenty, will sell that point to you over and over again. And it delivered Donald Trump in the United States. What will the lessons be for these Liberal politicians? Well, I dare say they'll lick their wounds for a bit. They don't even have a de facto leader at this point, because Biden stood aside for Harris, and Harris, never having made it to the presidency in the end, she's not really the boss here either, is she? But the opinions being offered by many people by way of media reaction interviews tells you an awful lot about their thinking. America hates women. America hates black women were prominent reasons given in many videos that I've watched. The white supremacy delivered a man whose pallor is at best tangerine into the White House. But it would be remiss of me to not acknowledge that as a white man myself, with white privilege, is likely a solid part of the story. Trump's misogyny and racism is also empirical fact. I'll not debate that point. But while some ethnic minority people certainly make that point and will make that point, others make a far different one. With one interview from the so-called Muslim capital of the US, Dearborn in Michigan, with one woman in a video I watched saying, if you don't want to vote for Jill Stein, then vote for Donald Trump. But do not give your vote to Kamala Harris and expect to be welcomed in my community. Gaza was a game changer. It swung the vote in swing states. Muslim support for Harris flatlined, deteriorated, and Democrats in Muslim areas, for the most part, faced an uphill battle. But there were clear exceptions, notably the clear victory of Muslim Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, who romped home winning 77% of the vote for herself. Helping her very much was the fact she refused to endorse Harris and has been a particularly vocal critic of the Israeli genocide in Gaza. None of that, of course, excuses what Trump has planned for Gaza either, given he wanted to move the US embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and his walking corpse of a son-in-law, Jared Kushner, wants to build hotels in Gaza. A vote for him will probably turn out to be even worse yet. But fundamentally, the Democrats lost because they decided they'd rather lose this election than condemn a genocide and admit to being wrong. So rather than blame people for voting for Trump, the blame needs to sit with the politicians who wouldn't shift their stances to make themselves more electable to more people. Because at the end of the day, they are the ones who let Trump back into power. Liberals always pave the way to fascism because they won't oppose it, but will oppose change. And when people get more sick and tired of the fact that nothing does change for them in their lives, then the populists will win. And this is what we see. We've seen it in the US here, and there are other examples we can point to where the same thing is happening before our eyes now, which shows a disturbing lurch globally towards more right-wing politics, amplified by compliant media which drown out any left-wing option or opinions. Take Germany as a prime example now. Their centrist government, again heavily pro-Israel, again not working in the interest of the German public, has just collapsed, with elections now to be held next year after a bust-up between Chancellor Olaf Scholz and his centrist coalition partners. The way is being paved again for the far right there. Unbelievable considering Germany's history, for it to rise again there. But we're seeing it. We've seen it come to pass in the US. It appears to be happening again in Germany now. And looking to the future, Kier Starmer is laying it all out for the far right here in the UK too. Kier Starmer has broken every pledge or promise he ever made. His election manifesto has readily become exposed as a pack of lies. This supposed leader of a supposed left-wing party is no such thing, and neither is Labour left-wing in any same sense or form. Now back in the hands of the self-proclaimed grown-ups who are basically a bunch of red Tories. People who went to the US to help Harris when they ought to be reflecting upon themselves. The trouble is, Liberals don't do that. And a prime example is a tweet from a supposed journalist, but more of a Liberal fake left Starmer fanboy, a guy called Paul Mason, who put out a severely tin-eared tweet saying, "What good is a performative left? Our job is to fight fascism in the communities it's taking hold of. That means a principled, tough liberalism on crime, migration, and national pride. The American left's obsessions and actions just handed ammo to Trump in his battlegrounds. The Starmer project is the only project in town. The left is either part of it or an obstacle to resisting what is coming. Our job," he says, as if he is in any way socialist or left-wing, before extolling the non-existent virtues of liberalism amongst the non-existent virtues of Kier Starmer, which is what is prompting the massive collapse of Starmer's Labour's popularity already, and seeing the Tories recovering before they've even chosen a new leader. And of course the rise of Reform UK under Nigel Farage, the media darling of the far right as he is, over in the US again to boost for Trump, having ignored his own constituents since he was elected as an MP himself. Yet the media machine behind him would see that Trump wannabe and hanger-on become Prime Minister here come the next election, because Kier Starmer and the Liberal hangers-on that he's got are paving the way for that. They are rising in the polls too, because a left-wing option doesn't get the same press, same attention, same level of focus. What is done at this moment in time in the US. There is time for other nations to learn from this before their next elections. But learn people must, or fascism is just going to continue to rise as a result of Liberals doing nothing different to what came before. Still believing they are always right and can't be wrong. But they are wrong. And only we can show them that with our votes, by taking them elsewhere and voting for change that only the real left will ever actually deliver. I appreciate there's a challenge in the US where there is no discernible left. But voting for the same two parties has led you to where you are now. So something has to change. And that can only come by changing who you vote for as a first step. Now, I'm not fond of I told you so's. I think they're pious and unhelpful, frankly. But I did do a video the other day where the third option in the US, Jill Stein's Green Party, was taking Harris votes, and why. And perhaps by way of reflection, Liberals, Democratic voters, some of them certainly, might benefit from having a watch of that. So check it out as my video recommendation here as your suggested next watch, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next feed. Cheers, folks.